Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the entrance of the official party. Please take your seats. On behalf of Marine Corps University, welcome to the conclusion of the Belleau Wood Lecture Series and the second installment of the Spring General Graves B. Erskine Distinguished Lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of Marine Corps University, Brigadier General William J. Bowers.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Marine Corps University. To all of our distinguished guests, thank you for joining us tonight. All of us from the Marine Corps University want to offer a special welcome to former Secretary of the Navy, former Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and former U.S. Marine Senator John Warner, our 29th Commandant, General Al Gray, the former Deputy Commander of European Command, General Carlton Fulford, our 33rd Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, General John Paxton, our friends from the Marine Corps University Foundation and Marine Corps Association and Foundation. For all other general officers, distinguished guests, friends of Marine Corps University, thank you for being with us tonight. Our first order of business this evening is to recognize the 4 winners of the Legacy of Belleau Wood essay contest that MCU co-sponsored with Marine Corps Association and Foundation. The competition was keen, and the 4 Marines with us tonight have truly excelled. I'll ask each of the winners to please stand and face the crowd when I call your name, and remain standing until all 4 winners are announced. Please hold your applause till the end. The winner for the Corporals and Below category is Lance Corporal Henry Liu from the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing out of Iwakuni, Japan. The winner for the Sergeants and Staff NCOs category is Staff Sergeant Matt Hanula from the University of San Diego MECEP program. The winner for the company grade category is Captain James Skeffington, currently a student at EWS. And the winner for the field grade category is Colonel Maria McMillan from the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for these exceptional Marines. Special thanks are due to Lieutenant General Faulkner and the Marine Corps Association for their generosity in sponsoring the commemorative plaques, cash prizes for the contest, for publishing the top essays, and for their support in sending our overall winner, Captain Skeffington, to France next month to observe the centennial commemoration of Belleau Wood. We'd also like to thank Lieutenant General Mills and our friends at the Marine Corps University Foundation for their continued support in supporting our Graves B. Erskine Distinguished Lecture Series and for making the Belleau Wood Lecture Series possible. Over the past 8 months, we've commemorated the centennial anniversary of one of our Corps' most iconic battles, Belleau Wood, which gave birth to the modern Marine Corps. Tonight's keynote speaker is a living connection to each of the eras we've learned about this year. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, the 31st Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Charles Krulak.
Well, let me start by saying what an honor it is to be here with this distinguished group today, particularly with these leaders and thinkers of tomorrow, and more importantly, the leaders and thinkers of the day after tomorrow. It is a real honor. And I know all the Marines in the audience understand we don't use that word lightly. So let me say it again. It is an honor to be here this evening. I would be remiss if I didn't point out a couple of people who I think deserve recognition. It's always dangerous, particularly when you have all these generals and distinguished colonels and guests from other services around. But let me just point out a couple of people. First is Senator John Warner, warrior, was in the Navy during World War II, Marine during Korea, Undersecretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Navy, the second longest serving senator from the state of Virginia. Just a remarkable man. I first met Senator Warner, and he's going to probably, he remembers it because he's always busting my chops about it. But I was wounded. It was on my second tour in Vietnam, and I'm laying in the bed rack and kind of doped up. And this gentleman walks in, very distinguished looking, good looking guy. And he's wearing a leather flak jacket. And he reaches down, and of course I'm doped up, and my foot's hanging off the cot or whatever it was. And he grabbed my toe, and he pinched it real hard. And he says, "Don't worry, son. It's going to be okay. You're going to feel great." And he walked off. And I remember asking the doctor later on, I said, "Hey, maybe I was dreaming this, but this good-looking guy in a flight jacket came by and pinched me on the toe and said, 'Hey, it's all going to be okay.'" And he said, "That was the Undersecretary of the Navy." I said, "My goodness." Okay, fast forward 30 years. I am a Commandant of the Marine Corps. And I hear that Senator Warner is in the hospital in Bethesda. What do you think, gang? So I get up and I get in my uniform and I'm looking good, as best I could look. Well, what can I say? Anyhow, I go up there and sure enough, there's the senator laying in bed. Now, he was doing some work, but it was perfect because he's laying in. I look down and there's that toe. And I grab his toe and pinch it and say, "Don't worry, son, it's going to be okay." He has never let me forget it. He has never let me forget it. Second person I'd like to recognize is General Al Gray. General Al Gray has got all kinds of kudos for all kinds of things. And most of us Marines, we think of the war fighting and the pamphlets he sent and the camouflage utilities and the cup in his hand. And boy, that's Al Gray. That's all great stuff. And I honor that. But his legacy is sitting right here. His legacy is you all. His legacy is education. And although we're all proud, and he's proud of being recognized for all he's done for the warfighting spirit, 100 years from now, it's going to be what you did for Marine Corps education. And there hadn't been a commandant since your time that hasn't tried to build on the foundation you laid. So thank you very much, sir. Carlton Fulford. Most of you all don't know Carl Fulford, or if you do, you know it only through history, so to speak. He's probably the only Marine alive today that has commanded everything from a platoon all the way up through a force. He's commanded 2 of the 3 MEFs. He commanded the largest task force ever seen in the United States Marine Corps, Task Force Ripper. He was a brilliant staff officer. Here at McCittick, he held my hand for a long time. And then he went on, as everyone knows, he went to UCOM and did great things there and continues to excel. Jay Paxson, to be honest with you, Jay and I really never served together. But Jay Paxson saved my bacon, and he doesn't even know it. Jay Paxson was the military assistant to the Undersecretary of the Navy by the name of Richard Danzig, and I needed something badly from Richard Danzig. And boy, did I ever suck up to Jay. Hey, Jay, hey, how you doing, man? Looking good. And before long, we developed some real rapport, and you'll see the results of what happened as I go through my talk. Now, the talk says, the enduring immutable truths of your Corps. I could spend literally a year talking about that. I'm not going to. I could distill it all into 6 words, and those would be making Marines winning battles valor and values, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through some vignettes and some stories that are all firsthand, coming from a lot of different people. All the historians in the audience can raise the BS flag at some point or another, but all I can tell you is it's what I got firsthand. And if it isn't any good, I'm not going to take the blame for it. What I will say is that I'm also not going to tell you when I hit an enduring truth. That's your homework assignment. Your homework assignment is to listen to what I have to say, and then in your own mind, take away what are the enduring truths from what I've heard. So I'm going to start at the end. On the 30th of June, 1999, my sweet wife, Zandy, and I, holding hands, crossed Center Walk at 8th and I Marine Barracks at the conclusion of my retirement ceremony. Short time later, we went down to the home of the commandants and paid our respect to the 32nd Commandant, General Jones, then did an about-face and walked down to the Navy Yard, where we had a BOQ room. I was met by my two sons, my two daughters-in-law, my mother-in-law, my one grandson at that time. We ordered pizza in, and we sat down there and ate pizza till late in the evening. When I finally went to bed that night and took off my uniform, it struck me that when I woke the next morning, it would be the first time in some 70 years that a Krulak would not be wearing the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. 70 years. In many ways, because of who my parents were, because of the people I had met over the years, and because of the things I'd seen, I felt then, and I still feel like I was born into the Marine Corps, like it's in the Marine Corps my entire life. And the reality is I was born a stone's throw from where we are right now. And what used to be the Communication Electronics School, it's now gone. At that time, it was a mini hospital that served also as a Boy Scout cabin. That ought to tell you something. As a young child, I emptied ashtrays at our kitchen table when men sat around that table and discussed the very survival of our Marine Corps. They turned out to be giants whose names have been emblazoned in our storied history. But at that time, they were simply nice old men who didn't seem to smile very often. It was not until much later that I understood who they were and what they were doing. These men, and a few others not pictured, fought a multi-year battle for the survival of our Corps, ended up with Congress establishing our roles, missions, and function into law, followed by setting our structure in law. And then years later, because of the foundation they established, the Commandant of the Marine Corps was made a permanent member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They were known as the Chowder Society. They're all wearing stars here, but let me tell you, for those young officers who think, hey, we really can't make an impact, most of these people were majors, lieutenant colonels, doing wonderful things for our Corps. By the time I was 10, I came under the wing of my godfather, an imposing elderly man wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a bushy mustache, a man hugely respected by my father. This is my godfather. Initially, I knew him simply as General Smith or Sir. Over the years, I came to know him as a true legend in our Corps, the father of amphibious warfare and the concept of the Fleet Marine Force, General Holland M. Howland Mad Smith. He regaled me in my early years with stories of World War I, of Belleau Wood, of attacking a forested island surrounded by a sea of wheat without adequate supporting arms. That memory, that vision played a significant role as he formulated his own thoughts on amphibious warfare. He talked about experimentation during the interwar years of a series of exercises called Calibra, or fleet landing exercises, flexes 1 through 7. He spoke of their importance leading up to World War II. He talked about Iwo Jima, but when he talked about it, it was always in hushed terms. On several occasions, as he was getting older, he reminded me that when the flag went up on Mount Suribachi, he was standing next to the Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal. And as the horns blew and the people on board the flagship cheered, Secretary Forrestal turned to my godfather and said, "Holland, the raising of that flag over Suribachi means a Marine Corps for the next 500 years. In typical General Smith manner, he'd look at me and say, "Chuck, that was total bullshit." And it was, because 500 days later, we were fighting for our very existence. I learned about my father's role in the development of the Higgins boat, the risks he took as a young lieutenant in observing a Japanese amphibious landing outside of Shanghai, China, and taking what he saw and sending a point paper accompanied by photographs and drawings to the Navy Bureau of Ships. He shared that when he returned from China in 1939, no one had seen his paper. So he went to Bureau Ships in search of it. He located it. It was in the basement of the building. It was in a file cabinet. Across the front of the paper was a handwritten note that read, quote, this is a quote, "submitted by some nut in China." He had the courage to take the paper and a model of the craft that he had made himself and took the paper, the model, the photographs, the drawings to General Smith, who took the paper, the model, and my father, still a lieutenant, to see the Commandant. The Commandant obviously was extremely interested in what he saw, but it was thwarted by a lot of bureaucratic infighting with the Navy on what they were going to use to make a landing craft. But until March 1941, at which time my father got a phone call from the Commandant and said, "You're going TAD and you're going to New Orleans and you're going to meet a man by the name of Andrew Jackson Higgins." And the rest is history. The rest is history. In July of 1946, the United States tested an atomic bomb at Bikini Atoll. Observing the test was a Marine Lieutenant General by the name of Roy Geiger. He recognized the threat that such a weapon posed for an amphibious operation. So he wrote a letter to the Commandant, General Vandergrift, outlining his concerns. General Vandergrift appointed a Major General by the name of Lemuel Shepard. You've seen that name already. To head a board to study the future of amphibious operations. General Shepard appointed 2 colonels, Ed Dyer and Merrill B. Bill Twining, and a lieutenant colonel by the name of Sam Shaw to help conduct that study. They quickly identified a particular piece of technology that was needed. It is called the helicopter. Unfortunately, their work languished as they were forced to study other concepts. Let me just give you 2 of the concepts they were forced to study. One of them was a massive submarine. We're going to stick all these Marines in a submarine and somehow get it close to the beach, and then Lord knows how they got to the beach. These are all serious. The second one was huge seaplanes that were going to land on the sea, taxi up to the beach, and disgorge all the Marines. This is what they were dealing with. Then one afternoon, a test pilot flew a Sikorsky hoverfly helicopter up to Quantico. Dyer and Twining are standing in a window that overlooked the airfield. It was their office. They're overlooking the airfield right over here. The bird pulled into a hover, and then, according to Dyer, quote, some crazy Marine came running out underneath the aircraft and was hoisted 15 feet into the air and into the cabin, unquote. Dyer turns to Twining and said, referring to the helicopter, let's do this thing and quit screwing around with these other concepts. The crazy Marine was Lieutenant Colonel Victor Krulak, and Dyer and Krulak later wrote the first manual on helicopter operations. Over these early years, I'm not sure I fully understood the significance of the actions that were taking place. At that time, I only knew that my father was associated with hugely impressive men who were dedicated to their Corps and to their country, and who talked about the Marine Corps in an almost spiritual manner. Two instructive vignettes from the Korean War. 25th of June, 1950, the North Koreans attacked. 30 June, 1950, a message was sent from JCS through the Chief of Naval Operations with concurrence by the Commandant to the Commanding General, Fleet Marine Force Pacific. It was very cryptic. And there it is. You can read what it has to say. The top part, not the reply. Here's the problem. There was no CG FMF pack. Lieutenant General Watson had departed to his new duty station. Lieutenant General Shepard hadn't reported yet. So the gentleman who was tasked with being the acting CG was a colonel by the name of Gregon Williams. He was the chief of staff. 2 days before, on the 28th of June, Colonel Krulak arrives at FMF PAC as the G3. Williams gives him the message. My father walks into his office, and about 5 minutes later came back with that reply. And that is the reply. That's how it went out. And Williams looked at it and said, can we do this? And Colonel Krulak said, we better be able to do it or we're dead. He was remembering back to the battles he just fought to get the Marine Corps to where it was then. The second vignette you're real familiar with, the Incheon landing. There was no one who believed that we should land at Incheon. The Army didn't, the Navy didn't, and the Marine Corps didn't. General MacArthur said, this is where I think we ought to land. General Shepard and my father fly to Japan, meet with General MacArthur, and lay out in great detail why Incheon was not the place, and you all know all the reasons, so I'm not going to bore you with them. And then said, and we have the place that you need to land at, which was about 30 miles south. Several days later, the decision brief went down. And this time, the Army, Navy, and Air Force all very emphatically said, not Incheon, this other location is the best place. And General MacArthur went through about a 45-minute speech, as well as he could give them, and he could give them well, and then ended up by saying, we will land at Incheon, and I shall crush them. We shall land at Incheon, and I shall crush them. Now, most Marines would have said, that egotistical SOB. I'm telling you, General Shepard loved it. Admiral Doyle loved it. We should love it. Why? Because that was a very, very senior Army general saying, I believe that Navy Marine Corps team can make that landing. I don't give a damn what everybody else says. I believe they can make the landing. And when they make it, I believe the Marines will negotiate that seawall, and they will fight, and they will win. Remarkable. Everybody's saying it couldn't happen. He said it could. Years later, I found myself wearing the Eagle Globe and Anchor, and like my contemporaries, serving in Vietnam. I was blessed to command a platoon and 2 rifle companies. During my 2 tours in country, I learned firsthand the selfless sacrifice of our young Marines. And I, to this day, just my eyes water when I think of these great Marines and whose shoulders you all stand on now. I learned firsthand also, because of my father's role as the commanding general of Fleet Marine Force Pacific at that time, the frustration of our senior leaders in the direction of the war. He talked to me about his discussions with the Secretary of Defense, members of Congress, and the President. I saw his frustration build. I recognized the intensity of his beliefs. And then eventually I learned of his last meeting with the President, of which you're looking at. It basically ended his career. You can see by the body language of both men that it was not a good meeting. One was a commander-in-chief, and one was just a commander. He left the Corps with his honor and his integrity intact. Coming out of Vietnam, I saw our commandants, in addition to many other contributions, take direct action to ensure the values of our Marine Corps, the individual Marine, as well as our warfighting capabilities, would be given priority after a long war. That's a challenge that we're facing right now. We're going to face this, and we better recognize it. So here's what happened. General Chapman oversaw the movement of Marine forces out of Vietnam and the rapid reduction of end strength from a peak of around 300,000 to around 198,000. He recognized that DOD would be asked for a peace dividend, which meant, obviously, an austere budget coming his way. Anticipating all of this, he made an early move to create, in his own words, a hard, lean, fully combat-ready Corps, reduced in size, but not in professionalism. It was General Chapman who first introduced what would become known as the Expeditious Discharge Program that began the process of reestablishing the high standards of our Corps. Generals Wilson and Barrow continued the pursuit of a Corps based upon strength of character and values and formalized the Expeditious Discharge Program, and more importantly, made significant and critical changes in recruiting and recruit training. Previous speakers have highlighted their remarkable and their lasting contributions. They stand in the Hall of Fame of Marines, I can tell you. General Kelly, as a lieutenant general, was the first commander of the Rapid Deployment Joint Task Force, the precursor to CENTCOM. He recognized that the ability to rapidly deploy large forces with staying power was problematic. This was also recognized by 2 secretaries of the Navy and 2 commandants. Through the efforts of those men, in particular, the near-term prepositioning ships force and then eventually the maritime prepositioning ships force were introduced into our strategic arsenal. The first MPS squadron took to the seas during General Kelly's watch. General Gray, I've already talked to you about what I believe in my heart and soul is his greatest contribution. He refocused the Corps on education, and he refocused the Corps on warfighting, and he opened the debate on maneuver warfare that he and I were just talking earlier today. We're not so sure the debate's over. But anyhow, that saw us to victory in Desert Storm. As an aside, Immediately prior to the war, General Gray assigned me as the commanding general of the 2nd FSSG. That's the MLG now, an infantry officer in command of a logistics unit in combat. For everybody in this audience, that turned out to be one of the most educational tours of my entire career, and it solidified my already strong views on the combat multipliers that then were known as women Marines and reservists. Thankfully, those terms are gone. They've been obliterated. We are one Corps, we're Marines. Coming out of Desert Storm, the Marine Corps' warfighting reputation was at its highest in years. We'd gone through the enemy minefields like a hot knife through butter, thanks to Carlton Fulford. We destroyed multiple Iraqi divisions. All thought our position in DOD was secure. But as we've seen in every war before Desert Storm, and we are going to see again, there came a cry for a reset, a peace dividend. This resulted in an event that at the time few recognized as the threat it became. I'm going to take a moment to share this important part of our history and once again stress the critical role that Congress played in this issue. The new Commandant, General Carl E. Mundy Jr., was directed that to meet the President's budget and program, the end strength of the Corps had to be reduced to 159,100 Marines. General Mundy realized this would be a crippling blow to our Corps and certainly to its capabilities. So he organized something called the Force Structure Planning Group, the FISPIG, and assigned it the mission of developing a ready, relevant, and capable Corps at 159,100, and then measure that Corps against the recently published National Military Strategy. And if the FISPIG determined that the Corps could not meet those requirements, then he directed it to build a Corps that could. I was a brigadier general at the time, serving at Headquarters Marine Corps. I was the director of both MM and what is now MCRIC. As if I didn't have enough work to do, I was tasked by General Mundy to chair the FISPIG. I was given the opportunity to handpick 17 officers from all over the Corps and from every MOS to come to Quantico TAD, to live in Liver's Edge, and stay until the task was completed. I was also given permission to ask for help from the exceptional men and women who were studying at the Marine Corps University. It was a tough time for our Corps. Parochialism within the MAGTAF was alive and well, and thus within our group it was alive and well. Parochialism had to take a back seat to what was good for the country and the Marine Corps. At 159,100 Marines, the Corps would be severely degraded. I'm going to just give you an example. There would be no Marines at Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. The entire 1st Brigade and all supporting activities would be totally eliminated. Other brigade headquarters across the Corps would either be eliminated or downsized. Air, ground, logistic command colors would be furled. Op tempo would go through the roof. At each step of the deliberations, sit reps were sent to our general officers, telling them what actions were being considered and seeking their advice. Thus, this small group, this small FISPIG, became an entire Marine Corps effort. Towards the end of the work, it became obvious that we could not meet the National Military Strategy at 159.1 and needed to start back adding both Marines and capability. We eventually built a ready, relevant, and capable Corps at 174,000 Marines. But that number, we remained in violation of the guidance that was provided by the President. At that point, General Mundy made a critical and courageous decision and directed the development of what he called the unassailable sail, basically a sales briefing that could be given to DOD and to Congress describing why we could not meet the President's guidance. The The Commandant himself provided daily comments on the contents of the brief. The brief was built upon the rigor of the fish pig and help from McCittick. The brief was completed and taken by the Commandant and presented to the Secretary of Defense. And the Commandant asked the Secretary if he could take it to the Congress of the United States. And the Secretary said yes. And so for over a period of weeks, we presented the brief to members of the SASC, the SAC, the HAS, the HAC, and to members of their staff. It was a 24/7 effort, speaking to these critical individuals whenever they could give us time. I remember chasing the staff director of the SASC into the restroom, trying to give him the last few tidbits of information that I thought he needed. We continually reminded the members that the Corps was theirs, that they put us into law, and that by maintaining a capable structure already mandated by the second session of the 82nd Congress, the Marine Corps would remain the nation's force in readiness, most ready when the nation was least ready. The effort was successful. The Marine Corps was authorized to go to 177,000 Marines. Most importantly, received all monies, including critical O&M funds associated with such an increase in end strength. The lessons learned so long ago about the importance of the Corps' relationship with Congress were driven home again to a new generation of Marines. And for a young brigadier general and 17 majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels, to us it was deja vu. It was Charter Society 2.0. A year later, I found myself as the commanding general of the Marine Corps Combat Development Command, surrounded by a remarkable group of leaders and thinkers. I want you to listen to these. My deputy was Major General Tony Zinni. The president of the Marine Corps University was Brigadier General Pete Pace. The head of training and education was Brigadier General Carl Fulford. The head of Warfighting Integration Division was Colonel Marty Steele. And the head of SysCom was Major General Jim Bradlam. If you look at your history books, you'll see every one of them made 3- or 4-star generals. It was during this time that a significant number of personnel were transferred to McCittick, including MAGTF structure sponsors, and that the concept-based requirement system and the combat development process were, because of all of those folks coming down here, fully fleshed out and introduced into the Marine Corps. For the first time, we, and for that matter, any service, could tie its budgetary requirements to its warfighting concepts and do so with great rigor. It was also during this time that we began a series of war games that were going to prove critical in a few years. Initially called Calibra, but later to be named Sea Dragon, they became the genesis of the warfighting laboratory that we have today. After leaving McCittick, I served as the commander, Marine Forces Pacific, commanding General Fleet Marine Force Pacific. The same command that my father had held some 30 years before, located at Camp H.M. Smith, named after my godfather. You can imagine how I felt going there. Although I had served several tours in the Pacific, this tour was critical. It served as a primer on the increasing power and influence of China and a more bellicose North Korea. It also served as a reminder that we all need to keep in our heads at the ever-present tyranny of distance that's found in the Pacific. As can be seen from a very young age, until I became commandant, I was taught, I was mentored, I was led, I was influenced, and I was supported by remarkable Marines, officers and enlisted, men and women. All believed in the sanctity of the United States Marine Corps. They believed in the centrality of making Marines of character and in those Marines' ability to win battles, making Marines winning battles. They believed in innovation and experimentation. They believed it was dangerous to focus on the last conflict and stressed the need to look towards conflicts that were yet to come at locations unknown to us and to be fought with op plans that hadn't even been written yet. long before anybody had conceptualized Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the rest of social media, long before instant news cycles. Men like Generals Vandergrift, Smith, Thomas, Twining, Hogeboom, Edson, my father, Wilson, Barrow, and so many others had an uncanny sense of what the American people expected of their Marines. Certainly, they expected them to win battles, but they also expected them to be individuals of character and integrity, individuals possessing strong values, values that would shine like a beacon through the past, the present, and into the future of not just our Corps, but our country. It was these values, in the memory of them, in the memory of the men and women who wore them as a badge of honor, that I carried with me as I assumed the post of the 31st Commandant. On the very day that I assumed the role as the Commandant, my father reminded me that the Commandant is not the Marine Corps, and that the Marine Corps is not the Commandant. The Commandant is simply a steward who temporarily holds a sacred trust for a period of 4 years. During the months between being announced as Commandant and assuming the position, I visited every living former Commandant and assistant Commandant. And I know General Gray remembers that because I picked their brains for gold nuggets that would help me in my stewardship of the Corps. Believe me, I knew I needed help. There isn't anybody that gets that job that doesn't need help. One of the things they told me, time and time again, an overriding theme was to clearly articulate my goals and objectives and to publish them early on. Thus, on the day I assumed command, we sent out the Commandant's planning guidance. 6 officers, male and female, wrote this 21-page document. 3 majors, 2 lieutenant colonels, and a colonel. Each of the 17 drafts of that document were sent to our general officers for comments. There are 2 critical themes in this document, both of them central and important. The first was that the world was changing and that we as a Corps needed to, as President Lincoln said, think anew. You're going to see 2 slides in a moment that lay out the landscape we saw for the future. They were used in a briefing entitled Ne Cra, which is Latin for not like yesterday. They were made in 1995. They were to be presented to members of the Department of Defense, members of Congress and their staff, and we even presented to the Council on Foreign Relations. Needless to say, many did not agree with our vision, especially after our nation's overwhelming victory in Desert Storm. The landscape that you'll see in these 2 slides gave birth to concepts and initiatives, some of which I'm going to mention in detail because they drove many of the other initiatives that were undertaken and are still being undertaken. The question was, can our current view of war meet tomorrow's challenges? Now, let me just take it, again, this is 1995, upper left. It may not be the Twin Towers, but the verbiage was the same, that we were going to get hit by terrorists, and it was going to be a massive target, and it was going to kill thousands, and it was going to send shockwaves throughout America. 1995. The second lower, the middle, at 9 o'clock, the idea of religious, cultural, tribal warfare was going to come into the ascendancy. Lower left, piracy. I can remember getting dumped all over, saying, hey, this isn't Tripoli, you're not going back, you got the Mamluk sword already. We thought, hey, if your Navy's losing ships, you become vulnerable. So why not think about piracy? In the middle there, it's tough to see, but we said there's going to be cyber warfare out there. We're going to be really vulnerable. And understand this was well before even something as simple as the iPhone was produced. I mean, iPhone came into production, it was sold for the first time on the 29th of June, 2007. This is 1995. We're talking about cyber warfare. They're saying we'll solve it by going to vacuum tubes. On the right, environmental dangers. And there were. I mean, but we're not just talking about man-made. We're talking about nature. Katrina, typhoons, tidal waves, anything. We're going to have to be able to prepare to tackle that. We got to have Marines who can do that. Chemical and biological weapons. You know, what are we going to do there? The upper right is kind of the peacekeeping, non-combatant evacuation, the taking care and humanitarian evacuation, etc. And then the center is obviously mid-intensity conflict. So the question was, can the current view of meet tomorrow's challenge? No. Current view is no longer adequate. And you see that shifting economic power to the Pacific. We were stressing that our real problem at that time weighed only 80 pounds, but was going to become an 800-pound gorilla, was China. China. And that we better pay attention to how much money they were gaining and what they were doing with that money. I'm losing my eyesight, so I'm going to look at here. Okay. I'm going to just come out here for a minute and read through it. Okay. Increasing cultural and religious strife. I can remember talking to some people on the Joint Staff, and they didn't know what Sunni and Shia were. I mean, think about that, gang. I mean, we're talking about the Joint Staff, 1995, and we're talking about cultural and religious warfare, and they don't know that? The rise of the non-state. You know, it was great to have state actors. You could always pick up the phone and call them up and say, hey, you better take those missiles out of Cuba. But you couldn't talk to them. Who are you going to talk to? And if you could talk to them, they were afraid you were going to send a beam rider down there and blow them up. So they're not going to answer the phone. Rapid change in weapons information technology, and that it was accessible to all the players. General Gray can talk a lot about this, but at the end of the day, we weren't talking about just stuff like we got right now. We were talking about hypervelocity weapon systems. We were talking about space-based weapons. How are you going to deal with that? And those lower tech weapons, guess what? They're going to be available to everybody. The CNN effect, everybody watched CNN during Desert Storm. They saw the power and the lethality of our weapon systems, and believe me, they said, we're not going in that direction. We're going to take them in a direction that type of capability isn't going to be as effective. And so you ended up with this drive towards asymmetric warfare where they pitted their strengths against our weaknesses. And what they do, they drew us in to the wooded terrain. They get you into the mountains. They certainly got you into urban terrain. And then the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So that instead of crisis, you had chaos. And the words we used were, it's no longer the son of Desert Storm, it's the stepchild of Chechnya. That drove something called the Three-Block War. Now, this isn't the original slide. This is a placekeeper. But what we were saying to the Army and the Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps was that, think anew. Things are going to change here. And we're not going to be fighting the near-peer competitor. We're not going to be doing all the Iraq and all of that all the time. We're going to be doing it, but it's going to be done almost simultaneously and very close together. And it's going to be called hybrid warfare, the Three-Block War. And you're going to have people spread out all over the place trying to control wrap a child in swaddling clothes in 1 minute, and you're doing humanitarian assistance. Next thing, you're keeping two warring factions apart. Next thing, you're in mid-intensity combat. And it's all happening almost simultaneously. How do you make a Marine to fight that? How do you make a Marine to fight that? The Marine you're looking to make is right there. It's a strategic corporal. It's a strategic lieutenant. It's that individual who no longer just is a war fighter. He's much more than that. And he's got a bedrock value system that when he has to make the tough call, he makes the right one. He doesn't piss on a dead Iraqi. He makes the right call. They got to be really smart. They got to be really good. And so we said, okay, we know what the environment's going to look like. We know who we need. Let's go get them. And here's what we were getting them from. Man, I loved them. I mean, take a look at those. I mean, that's Generation X. That's what we had to work with. Generation X. We knew nothing about Generation X, and neither did the Army, Navy, or Air Force, because nobody was making quota. We just didn't know about them. We had a good sense, but we didn't really know. So on Monday, I became the Commandant on a Friday. On Monday, into my office, we had some psychiatrists and psychologists come. And I said, I got a mission for you. And it's one that's going to be pretty simple, because all I want you to do is go out and give me basic traits of these people. What'll turn them on? What gets to them? What's going to make them tick? And I said, you don't have to do a lot of research. I don't want a bunch of, sending out. Call people up. Call colleges and universities. Talk to high school counselors. Find out about them. And while you do that, we're going to do the following. We're going to make Marines for the 21st century. We're going to do something called transformation. And in order to do this, I'm going to need the Congress of the United States supporting me, because it's going to cost money, it's going to cost training, transits, patience, and personnel. It's going to cost an awful lot. It's going to cost time and effort. But we're going to take that Generation X and we're going to make them those fighters in the bottom. So we started off with recruiting. I told you, nobody was making quota. So what we did was we said, okay, first off, we knew what the other services were doing, which was lowering standards and offering benefits. They were lowering their standards, lowering high school graduates, mental group 1 through 3 alpha, number of drugs, et cetera, and then giving bonuses to enlist, and they weren't making it. So we said, we're going to change it. And poor old Pete Osmond, he wasn't totally in the seat, but he knows what I'm talking about. We're going to change it. We're going to raise all the standards. We're going to raise the high school graduate standard. We're going to raise the mental group 1 through 3 alphas. We're going to tell every drill instructor, and we're going to tell every recruiter that if they successfully complete their tour, they're going to get their choice of duty station, guaranteed. Officer and enlisted. You want to go to Hawaii, you're on your way. Thank you for your service to our Corps. Thank you for your service to our Corps. We then said, okay, we got these recruiters. We went out with the recruiting screening team. We had MMEA literally pick the creme de la creme, and we put them on orders, and they came to the recruit depot, and they came to the recruiting command. And at that point in time, we said, okay, we got ourselves fairly well settled. Now we got to figure out who these gents are that we're recruiting. And this is what they came back with. It's very basic. You all know this already. But the key thing for these kids was they didn't mind being structured. They didn't mind being held accountable. They wanted to know exactly what they were going to face. They wanted to know what the parameters were. But Lord help us if you give them a little bit of daylight, because they'd be out there doing something nasty on you really quickly. They were willing to be followers if they could at some time, in some point, be leaders. The psychiatrist said, listen, let me just tell you, these guys, that's also gang members. They'll be more than willing to sell dime bags on the street corner if they can sell the big stuff or push it later on. They want to be easily recognized as part of a group or a team. You know, again, the gangs, they wear their colors, the trench coat mafia. They wanted to do something of value. And they believed in something greater than themselves, religion or some other power. And I said to myself, that's great. Are you kidding me? Isn't that what we want? Well, why are we having trouble with this? I think, in fact, the decision to raise standards fills the bill in all of these areas. But how do we get the word out other than just the recruiters beating on doors? So I got a hold of an outfit called J. Walter Thompson. And I said, okay, I said to J. Walter Thompson, I want you to make an ad that's really going to knock our socks off. Man, Marines are going to sign up by the bazillions. And they said, okay, well, I'll do it. And they came back about a month later, 2 months later, and the guy who came to see me, I don't think he'd ever shaved. He was probably 14 years old, okay? Young guy, you know, had a cassette tape. You know what a cassette is? You know what a cassette is? Okay, he had a cassette. And he stuck this cassette into the player and played this video. Now, remember, we're trying to look at these people. We want them to go through challenges. We want them to be thinkers. We want them to be physically fit. We wanted them to be willing to fight anything and win, but we also wanted them to be able to understand and fight what was wrong in themselves and come out victorious. We wanted them to be transformed, and we damn well wanted the transformation to be forever.
It is more than a trial by fire. It is a rite of passage, a challenge to join the elite. And if you succeed, if you can master your fear, outsmart your enemy, and never yield even to yourself, you will be changed forever. The few, the proud, the Marines.
Now, you're the Commandant of the Marine Corps. You're Al Gray. You're Chuck Krulak. And they show you that. I said, what the hell is that? I said, we spent $1.5 million and that's it? I said, I got to tell you, where are the tanks? Where's the amphibious landing? You know, I said, there's no way, after watching that, would I join the Marine Corps. And this little guy, God bless him, looked me in the eye and he said, sir, we're not trying to recruit you. We're not trying to recruit you. Think about that. Those are very honest words. Okay, we go to recruit training. We added 100 hours to recruit training. 100 hours. Gave 100 hours back to the drill instructor. You see the woman Marine in the Smokey Bear hat. When I became the Commandant, they didn't wear that hat. They wore a little red rope around their left sleeve. And we expected them to gain the respect of the Marines over in different recruit battalions. We expected their own Marines to look at them and say, boy, I'm part of an elite unit being trained by a drill instructor. Sergeant Major Gary Lee, God bless him, put up with that for about 1 nanosecond. And we went out and got Smokey Bear hats for all the women Marines, and then we said we're not going to have them dropping out of runs at 1.5 miles. They're going to do the 3 miles, and we tried desperately to bring the woman Marine, DI, and the individual Marine into a sense of great respect for what they do for our Corps. We instituted something called the Crucible. Because if you look at what we promised Generation X, we promised a lot of things, and to deliver it, we had to give them what I called a gut check. Because most of these kids, unless they were on the wrestling team or boxing or something very much of a contact sport, they'd never been really tested. And so what we did was we said, okay, we're going to give them a gut check. And it's going to be 54 straight hours of food and sleep deprivation. And if they don't make it, they're not going to be a Marine. Simple as that. And if it means we have to drop 50%, we'll drop 50%. But they will make the Crucible. They will cross the finish line after that 54th hour. Now, if they cross the finish line with their fellow Marines carrying them on a stretcher, or if they cross the finish line with their fellow Marine carrying 2 packs and their weapons, we're going to accept them. Because what's happened is their fellow Marine says, this person should be a United States Marine. But I remember the very first Crucible I went to on the West Coast, when those young studs are coming up the Grim Reaper. And some of you have probably done that, right? Yeah. Okay, they're coming up the Grim Reaper, and I'd watch some of them really having trouble, and their fellow Marines would kind of help them up and grab them. I also watched Marines just leave them on the ground. And when they got to the top, I got one of the drill instructors. I said, he explained to me why that was. And he said, what they're saying is, he's not ready to be a Marine. He's not fit to be a Marine. And that person was gone. And I'll never forget the very first Crucible I went to was at Parris Island, and I stood there. I walked in. I marched in the last 10 miles, and we got to the Iwo statue, and this Sergeant Major got up and gave the most remarkable, motivating speech, and all the DIs came out with a nice felt board with the Eoglobin anchor on it, and they had colors. And then they started playing Lee Greenwood's I'm Proud to Be an American. And they started handing these Eoglobin anchors out. And I didn't know what would happen. I mean to tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Those recruits were just weeping. And the drill instructors were crying. It was that powerful that all of a sudden they were something. They were going to do something of value. And it made a big difference. So we get them. We go through recruit training, and then something called cohesion, which was almost an impossible to achieve. It's a spin-off of the regimental system in England. We had an awful lot of trouble, but the whole idea was to take series, bring them out of series, send them to their MOS producing schools, and as best we can, keep them all together. And if you had a big chunk of them and they were all 03s, they went to 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, all together. And when they got there, I don't care whether you had UDP going here, there, and everywhere, they didn't move from that battalion. In order to get moved, they had to go to Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and I don't think MNRA ever gave them permission. But to get cohesion was extremely difficult. And the people at MP and MM just went hogaroo trying to figure out a way to do it. At one point, this United States Marine Corps of yours had 83% of the individuals in those units were cohesion Marines, in cohesion units. The proof of the pudding, obviously, is you know what would have happened. I mean, all the problems, the UAs went down, drug-related incidents went down, every indicator went down, as you would expect. Retention skyrocketed. But you had to sustain it, and you all are the keys to sustainment now. You're doing it right now. There's a document put out called Sustaining the Transformation. If you haven't read it, if you haven't digested it, if you haven't breathed it, lived it, you got to do that, because that's what's going to keep us where we need to be. That's what you get. That was Generation X. So you have these great Marines. You know what the environment's going to look like. How do you get the thinking of the Corps into the first battle of the next war and beyond? And that was the mission of the Warfighting Laboratory. The Warfighting Laboratory was essentially to steal a march on the future. To steal a march on the future. That is still their mission. Their mission is not tactics, techniques, and procedures, and let me get you some widget here or widget there. Their focus is on winning the first battle of the next war. Their focus is on bringing industry into McCitic and telling them what the concept is for the concept-based requirements, and then saying, here's the concept, here's kind of what we're thinking, what can you do for us? And then experiment with them. Calibra, Sea Dragon. And I went to an innovation talk the other day. It was brilliant. But what I found very interesting is some of the things that they were talking about we were doing in Sea Dragon. You know, the K-Max, the first time the K-Max was used was in Hunter Warrior. We took drones for the first time, handheld drones, Hunter Warrior. Communications, Hunter Warrior. Finding out how smart these kids were came out of those advanced experiments. Very, very important. It remains extremely important to our Corps. Chemical Biological Incident Response Force. I told you I was out at PAC. The terrorists, set off a sarin gas explosion in the Tokyo subway system. And I mean, it caused real havoc. I go down to PACOM commander, an admiral by the name of Dick Mackey, and I said, Dick, what can we do? What can we do? How can we help here? What's the scoop? And he said, well, we really don't have anything that can really help turn victims into patients. And so when I became Commandant, I looked at Jay Paxson and his boss, who was interested in the issue of chem bio and chem bio defense. And so we started talking, and he introduced the Marine Corps to a Nobel laureate by the name of Josh Lederberg. And Josh Lederberg told the Marine Corps what they needed to have a first-class chemical biological incident response force. First class. Do we have any money to do it? No. We went to the Congress of the United States, and they gave us $40 million to buy the complete suite of equipment. And I mean, it is top. You have the individual who's taking care of the patient in his suit, totally covered, has a little thing attached to his glasses. There was a camera that could measure the mucus in a person's nose, shoot it back to Johns Hopkins Hospital, and get Lederberg and his people to diagnose and to help us along the way. A major, major step forward for America. It was a strategic asset. First time it was used was at the Olympics in Atlanta. Big explosion went down there on day one, and they thought, boy, this is it. Guess who was already there? Already there was Seaburg, because we knew the number of people that was going to be there, and we better be in position. Every time the president speaks, he gives his State of the Union message, guess who's right around the corner? Seaburg. This is a national asset, but it's ours. Standing Joint Task Force. We just sat there and we looked at the chaos in the world, and we said, look, we're going to have Joint Task Force all over the place. Why don't we have a standing Joint Task Force in several areas so we're not ad hocing this thing? That's what we were doing. We were ad hocing. You'd take Joe Blow from here and this from the Navy and that from the Army, that from the Marine. They never met each other. Lots of them don't even talk the same language, basically. And we made a Joint Task Force out of it. I said, look, I'll tell you what, we'll build a facility down at Capitol Hill. We're going to build a facility there. We're going to help staff it. We won't be the commander. You pick the commander. Joint staff agreed. So did the services. And so there, we're set to go, standing Joint Task Force. Now, you're going to laugh at that. This was given to me by a corporal in the 2nd Marine Division. It's a Build-A-Bear. But the Build-A-Bear has got all kinds of Gore-Tex on it. The Gore-Tex came from a lot of different areas, to include the warfighting laboratory. But the bottom line is, our Marines thought, or we thought, that Marines could be shielded from rain by wearing rubberized rain gear. You remember you remember wearing that? Or what about the Colt field jacket? Boy, that sucker was really great, wasn't it? So all of a sudden we have these great new Marines, and they're really doing great things. Let's equip them. Let's give them a load-bearing equipment that's good. Let's give them a bivy sack. Let's give them new boots. And that's what we did. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there in a home of the commandants, and this thing's delivered. I've kept that puppy with me wherever I go now. This is a battle that General Gray fought, that commandants before General Gray fought. In that commandant's planning guidance, you'll read a very succinct sentence. We are going to neck down, type model series, and we're going to be all VSTOL. All VSTOL. And that wasn't well received by too many people, certainly outside of the Marine Corps. And I can remember being called down to DepSec Dep's office. And he sat me down and he said, look, I'm going to give you an offer you can't refuse. You're not going to be able to refuse it. I'm going to give you the Black Hawk, and I'm only going to charge you 10 cents on the dollar. And I'm going to give you the F-18E and F, and it'll cost you about 30 cents on the dollar. And because the Army's going to pick up the rest, because they need your buy, and the Navy's going to pick up the rest. And thank God for McCittick, because I came up there, General Gray, you'll love this, I went up there with the documents supporting our concept of maneuver from the sea and how we were going to do it. And sure enough, the end result was, he said, go with your concept. I put this in for General Gray. Training is preparation for the expected. Education is preparation for the unexpected. Every commandant has taken that and moved it forward. Not that he didn't move it 20 football fields and the rest of us done 10 yards, but the bottom line is distance learning, things that didn't exist when he was there, the ability to use, face-to-face, whiteboard, going into different locations without needing any extra assist other than what you could put up on a VTC. We used to think that ISMET was the greatest simulator in the world. Man, I'm going to tell you, we were really sharp. Does anybody remember ISMET? Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at that saying, my gosh, that can't be it. There's got to be more to it than that. There's got to be some modeling. There's got to be some simulation. We got to get beyond this. And so we went to the Congress and said, we need some help. We want to do this. And the bottom line, they said, you're right. You're spot on. We're going to help you out. Family readiness. I don't need to tell you that. It's essential to mission readiness. You don't have a strong family. You have a worry back home. You're not going to be ready to fight. What was interesting is the people who first led this were the spouses. You all have a FRO now, okay, family readiness officer. They didn't have any family readiness officer. It was the CO's wife or the sergeant major's wife or somebody else's wife, and they put it together. There wasn't anything called links. The women put links together. Key Volunteer Network, the women put it together. The commander's course. My wife kicked the living daylights out of me, saying, you're doing a great job there, Chuck, for crying out loud. You got this commander's course going. What about the women? What about the spouses? What about the men and the women? The spouses. Aren't they part of this? And so in they came. You follow that up, fair new fitness support system went in 1999. We had such gross inflation, it just wasn't funny. Everybody walked on water. They did another test in 2005 after this one went in, and there was minimal inflation over what had just happened. Renewed effort to engage the Congress, very similar to what General Gray did. Breakfasts, lunch, and dinners at the home of the Commandant, but more importantly, at every 3-star, we're going to get the 3 stars involved, inviting the congressman, because there where our lifeblood is. And then a laser focus on the twin values, twin touchstones of valor and values. I'd like to tell you right now that all of these initiatives were successful. We made no mistakes, encountered no problems, walked across the Potomac River arms linked singing Kumbaya. That would be a lie. Within days of becoming Commandant, 2 Marines and a sailor raped an Okinawan girl. The classic failure of what we wanted in the strategic corporal and a classic failure of what we wanted in our core values. The tactical actions of those individuals are still being felt in our strategic relations with the Japanese and Okinawan people. We stood up the JTF headquarters at Camp Lejeune. We were told, hey, we're going to be there. Nobody showed. We shut it down. We labeled the warfighting laboratory the Commandant's Warfighting Laboratory. Big mistake. Because it detracted from the obvious need that the entire Marine Corps had to play. So we quickly changed the name. We sought funds, as I said, to upgrade our modeling and simulation, and we were only minimally able to do what we needed to do. I have my eyes water when I see what you have right now. I mean, you all are in such good shape. You're moving ahead. My gosh, the question is, are you using it? And that's only a question you can answer. The Aviano cable car tragedy, where U.S. Marine Corps aircraft flying below established minimums, excess speed over a ski area, severed a cable car. Severed the cable. 20 people plunged to their death. A blood-winning video that made national news. Sexual misconduct by our senior officers. All of these were impacting on our reputation and on our focus on core values. The American people, the Congress, our commander-in-chief, all know that when they call the 911 force out, our Marines are going to don their helmets, they're going to don their flak jackets, they're going to grab their weapons, they're going to march to the sound of the guns and the smell of cordite, they're going to fight, and they're going to win. All of those people know that. They believe it. Yet what they cherish is a belief that the Marine Corps represents, in a way, Caesar's 10th Legion, standing at the gates of Rome, protecting the Republic. They believe we're Spartans, standing at the gates of fire at Thermopylae. A belief that we're always going to be there. A belief that we will never fail to be a manifestation of what is good about America and what's good about American youth. That we're keepers of a flame, of a value system that even in this day and age when values are under attack, remain at our core. Honor, courage, commitment. Every time we let the American people down in this most critical area, we draw upon the reservoir of goodwill that hundreds of thousands of Marines who have gone before us, filled with their blood and their sweat and their tears. The task is more difficult today than it's ever been. The changing morals and the value system in our country is magnified by the technology that is now in the hands of everyone. A video or a picture can be posted on YouTube and seen by millions in a matter of minutes. Privacy is fast becoming a thing of the past. Describing the battlefield is no longer just the purview of the war correspondent or the embedded reporters. Today, a young Marine can do more good or harm with his cell phone than dozens of reporters in previous times. What people see and hear is more powerful than what they read. My dear friend, Brigadier General Tom Droughty, was teaching a class here at Marine Corps University on the military and media. Tom asked a Wall Street Journal reporter and a noted author by the name of Michael Phillips to come speak to his class. At the end of Phillips' talk, one of the Marine students stood up and confronted him with the following statement. Quote, "The media never writes about the good things Marines do, but only about the bad stuff." Michael stood unmoved and replied, and I quote, "You must understand what news is. Marines doing good things is not news, since the American people expect their Marines to be perfect. When you're not perfect, when you do bad stuff, that's news." Now, we're a core of human beings. Zero defects never be an achievable goal, and by God, it never should be. Zero defects is the enemy of initiative. But I do challenge each one of you to understand and hold your own personal honor dear, and hold the honor of our Corps dear, and pledge to yourself, not on my watch is any of this going to happen. And that brings us to the second and most important theme found in the planning guidance. It's also the biggest lesson I have learned over my many years associated with our beloved Corps. It's the one thing, it's the only thing that I implore each of you to remember and embrace from this talk. And it's best articulated in the words of my father. We exist today, we flourish today, not because of what we know we are or what we know we can do, but because of what the grassroots of our country believes we are and believes we can do. The American people believe that Marines are downright good for the country, that Marines are masters of a form of unfailing alchemy which converts unoriented youth into proud, self-reliant, stable citizens into whose hands the nation's affairs may safely be entrusted. And likewise, should the people ever lose that conviction as a result of our failure to meet their high, almost spiritual standards, the Marine Corps will quickly disappear. And likewise, Should the people ever lose that conviction as a result of our failure to meet their high, almost spiritual standards, the Marine Corps will quickly disappear. Not on your watch. Not on your watch. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, General Bowers.
What? Guys, give me orders already, for crying out loud.
We're not ready, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you all for joining us for this special event. Thank you for being a part of the Belleau Wood Lecture Series. General Krulak, sir, this is the perfect culmination for our Belleau Wood Lecture Series, and no one who was present for this evening's lecture will ever forget it. On behalf of the students, faculty, and staff of Marine Corps University,
Wow.
we have this small token of our appreciation. It is a collage of significant photos of all significant events of the past 100 years.
Well, thank you, Bill.
Semper Fidelis.
That is phenomenal. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. As I looked in the audience, I saw a couple of people that I really do need to mention. Every commandant needs a Diogenes. Every commander needs a Diogenes, a seeker of truth, the person who tells the emperor they didn't going to wear any clothes. Mine is here today, Colonel Russ Appleton. Is Russ here, Russ? What? You're not here? He's here. Pete Osmond and all he did. There's John Toolin, God bless him, commanded Marine Forces Pacific. Who am I missing? You never should go through all of this. But anyhow, the point is, in this little group of people right there are some of the great men and women of our Corps. And it's an honor for me to have them show up. I had to pay them a little, but it's a... Anyhow, thank you all very much. God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you for participating in tonight's event.